Yeah. Oh, you're trained decoupled.
One dog. Especially when you're running a long line.
Yeah.
But you got nice trains, I like them.
Thank you.
Presentation's about to start.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this combined Science Meets Art Train Club event, where we're going to have a talk by Christopher Schulte. Before I introduce Chris, I need to kind of acknowledge some financial support. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the library, The Fallsington Library Company is an independent 501c3 community library that cooperates with the Bucks County Free Library. It began in 1802 and our building dates from the 1870s. Science Meets Art and the Train Club are programs of the Fallsington Library. Normally, Science Meets Art is on the third Tuesday and Train Club is on the fourth Tuesday of every month. There's no charge for these programs. This talk and program received funding from the Amazon Bucks County Community Fund, and we also received support from the Delaware Valley chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. So, without further ado, let me introduce Chris. The year 1974 marked the beginning of Chris's career on a short line railroad, where he gained practical experience in track work from the crews responsible for construction and maintenance. The following 19 years were spent as a boomer, that's someone who travels from railroad to railroad, working across freight, commuter, rapid transit, and light rail systems. These assignments formed a broad foundation in construction, maintenance, and inspection, experience that informs every page of Chris's book. In 1994, a 25-year tenure with the Federal Railway Administration, FRA, began, focused on nationwide safety inspections, accident investigations, and detailed forensic reconstructions. Among the most significant early assignments was a 2-year field oversight role in Amtrak's Northeast Corridor electrification project from New Haven to Boston. The project maintained a strong safety record during this period, and he earned recognition with the 1997 National Inspector of the Year Award. Concurrently, service on the Massachusetts Operation Lifesaver Board supports statewide efforts to improve safety at highway and rail grade crossings, a particular interest of my own. After the Northeast Corridor project, a transition was made to the FRA's Washington office to serve as a safety specialist. Responsibilities there included managing the nationwide shared use policy, which addresses the complex mechanical, signaling, and operational interfaces between light rail transit vehicles and common carrier trains. During the final 12 years with the FRA, he supervised the regional staff of track inspectors across the Mid-Atlantic. Chris has remained active in the railroad industry, including conducting track inspection training for the Railway Education Bureau. More recently, he authored the book, Railroad Infrastructure Cyclopedia, published in 2026 by Simmons Boardman Books. It's a contemporary reference to track structures, signaling, and related fields. It serves as an encyclopedic dictionary for the railroad industry, blending historical context with modern practice. As a cyclopedia, it's organized alphabetically, making it a go-to resource for defining terms, explaining concepts, and providing insights into the evolution of railroad infrastructure. With its roots in over 2 centuries of engineering tradition, the book honors the labor-intensive history of railroading while addressing contemporary challenges like automation, safety regulations, and sustainable maintenance. Okay, and today, Chris is going to talk to us about railroad whistle and flag signals, something that, since I know you're all interested in whistles, this will tell you some things you can do with your whistles. So,
Very good.
introduce
All right,
Chris.
thank you. I'm going to play railroad here. So one of the things we do, when we have a railroad meeting, we talk about safety, so we'll do that. That's the exit there, right? That's the official exit.
Yeah,
Official exit that way as well.
Yeah.
and that's also an exit out that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that exit to the left is an emergency exit.
That'd be a regular. That'd be just emergency. That's a regular.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. I count about 40 people here, which is a nice showing, and that's about a dozen adults, and that's a good train since I was a little fellow, and I stayed with it, and that got me a career through my life, and to this day, and that's something I really enjoy. There's a lot of things we're going to talk about. The first thing I want to talk about is my book, and it's, as Neil showed you, it's for sale and from the publisher. It's an expensive book, but it's well worth it. It's $100 plus shipping from the publisher. Today I have a couple copies here. I've sold for $80, and of course there's no shipping, so that's a reasonable price. And even for the children, take a couple of these flyers with you. Any adults that you know be interested in the hand of the flyer, they might be interested in purchasing from the publisher. We're going to talk about a whole range of signals, and right off the bat, Neil talked about grade crossings and whistles. And one of the things in the presentation, when we get to it, I'm going to start off with it, is can anybody, except for the adults, except for the railroad adults, can anybody tell me what the series of signals are when the train approaches a crossing? Anybody? All right. How about the railroad guys? I know your railroad guys know what that is, right? What is it?
Yeah, long, long, short, long.
Very good. Too long, short, and long. Can anybody tell me why it's too long, short, and long?
It's to notify people that there's a train approaching the crossing.
Okay. Why is it not 4 longs?
Probably has to do with Morse code. Elaborate Morse code.
I have yet to find this in writing, but verbal tradition is that before the long, the long, the short, the long, it was just a random, there was nothing specified, and they found that back in the early days of railroading, of course, they didn't have automobiles, everybody traveled by horse and carriage, right? Buggy.
Right.
And when the carriages would get to the grade crossing, the horses would get startled, and they found that by moderating it to a long, a short, a long, it was seemed to not startle the horses as much. So that's verbal tradition. I haven't found anything in writing on that, but that's what I've been hearing passed down to me. Very interesting. So there's a lot of different whistle signals, and they have a specific meaning, and that one's reserved for the grade crossing. Railroad crossing safety, since Neil has a particular interest in that, real quick, I have a background in Operation Lifesaver as well. And when you come across a railroad crossing, the gates are down. This is mainly for the children, so you guys can tell your parents when they're driving what to do and what not to do. When the gate comes down, when there's no train come, what's the driver supposed to do? Go around the gates?
No.
Very good.
Yeah,
Why?
find the DOT number tag and report the malfunction by calling the railroad.
There you go. There's this blue sign at the crossing. That's a DOT ID number. In most states, every state has its own motor vehicle code, and virtually all states have the same code in that if you come to a railroad crossing and the gates are down, it's illegal to drive around. So you just have to turn around and find another way. Now, if there's no gates, right?
Right.
And the lights are flashing, and the trains are not, you're waiting 3 or 4 minutes, there's no train coming, you're absolutely positively, you can see there's no train, you legally can cross. It's like a stop sign. But you don't do that immediately, you have to wait sufficient to make sure there's no train coming in and you can go.
Yeah, just look both ways.
Look both ways, and listen. Listen, I have a habit, I usually don't. If you slow down, you're going to get an accident. Everybody drives crazy these days, but slow down a little bit, open your window and listen to the horn in case the active warning devices. I use the word active warning device, meaning flashers and gates are active warning devices. If it fails, that's very serious. It very rarely happens. You can still hear the whistle. Right? There's also passive warning signs. That means there's no flashers, no gates. Usually just a railroad crosswalk, an advance sign, and you can just proceed through. The train typically has the right of way. There are some crossings, the highway has the right of way, and that's called a crossing. That's a crossing with a highway actually has a right of way. That's called an exempt. And you see it on the sign, exempt. You see around, and that's
Yes.
exempt. All right?
It's also marked for abandoned railroad crossings when the right-of-way is no longer in use.
You'll find it there as well. Yes. There's a crossing, and can go to the next slide. And we're going to talk about some of the early history, before we had radios, before we had telegraph, whistle signals, flag signals were basically the only way the trains would communicate with one another. Okay, they had what's called a lot of flagging. When the train would move along, the train would stop. That's called Rule 99. One of the crew members would have to get out and go back and flag behind them, just make sure there's no train coming, and the train coming and flag and the stop. That was how we did it in the old days.
Mhm.
They ran by timetable schedule. All right. So we had red and green, and that's the two basic signs. And some places today, signs are called flags and vice versa. You go west of the Mississippi, you see the signs in the ground, metal sign. They still call it a flag. Okay, whereas on the East Coast, a flag on the ground is called a sign. It's semi-permanent sign on the ground. Green is permissive, red is typically stop, of course. It's just like our highway. Okay, go ahead, next one. We're going to talk about hand signals, whistle signals, flag signals, communicating, and towers. So there's a whole raft of things that we normally don't think about. Okay, other than just whistle signals, there's hand signals, lights, flags. The hand signals given by an employee, whistle horn, the engineer. Okay, he's signaling to highway roadway crossings, right? He's coming up to the highway. But how many seconds before?
Around 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's pretty good. 30 seconds. That's what 20 seconds is the law.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
20.
Flag signal as displayed. Flags for trains are not prominent today because of radio communications. Has taken the place of a lot of things, and even taken the place of a lot of employees. At one time, there were typically 5 members of a crew. Okay?
Yeah, the engineer, fireman, conductor, and brakeman.
Very good. This guy's on the ball right here. I like this guy. You're really on the ball there. Okay. And as time goes on, you had flagging on the back of the caboose, right?
Yep.
So the caboose is gone. What happened?
Yeah.
Radio communication.
Yeah, and new technologies. He's like flashing rear end devices.
Okay. And did everybody see that? A little bit fuzzy for me. Is that in focus on there? You know, a little tweak. That's a little better. There we go. All right, communicating signals. Anybody tell me what that is? Other than the railroads. You ever ride a train?
Yeah.
Passenger train?
Communicating signals.
He needs to say something to the engineer. So rather than really have a buzzer, the engineer and the conductor or trainer they have certain buzzing signals. He'll tap the button that tells the engineer it's okay to proceed.
Mm-hmm.
That's communicating signals. Tower horn signals, just like on the train itself. Before I go to what's a tower? Anybody tell? Besides the railroaders, what is a tower? Anybody tell what a tower is?
Yeah, one of those those signal towers, hers that control the signals, and the dispatch tower, hers that control the trains and such.
We call block stations, towers. They were very common, very frequently along the railroad, and towers were typically junctions where a series of tracks come together, crossing switches, towers, and they're going away. A lot of towers are simply not used anymore because of communication, a thing called centralized traffic control. And one dispatcher control many hundreds of miles of railroad, whereas 30, 40, 50 years ago, you'd have dozens of employees all scattered all over communicating with each other locally to operate and dispatch and control the train movements. But anyhow, there's also tower horn signals. And when I first started back, I was working on the Broad Street subway in the early 70s. You'd be walking track and they have towers, and they would sound the horn, a high-pitched whistle, and for example, don't hold me to this sequence of two toots was for a trackman to call the dispatcher, 3 toots was a signalman to call the dispatcher. So that was an audible signal that you were listening listen for while you're working out on the railroad, before the common use of radios. Okay. 1833, in England, Lancaster and Swarrington Railway train struck at Forscorn Part near Bagworth in England, and the engineer's small hand horn had gone unheard. Had a small handheld horn. So at that point, George Stevenson responded to the steam trumpet, a whistle sounded by a boiler steam, built to his order by a musical instrument maker. That was the beginnings of the steam locomotive whistle. At the same time, Andrew Stevens, an engineer at the Dallas Ironworks in Wales, devised a steam whistle as a boiler alarm, an independent invention of the same era for the use in boilers, other than in railroad application. Americans railroads adopted the same technology, the whistle, in the 1830s and 1840s. Okay, next. From local custom to national code, 1830s, hand flag lantern signals were used, and that was the way they moved trains. You never hear the high ball, some of the earlier signals, high ball. Ever hear a train? High ball, go quick. Some of the early signals were nothing more than a ball. They were lifted up, and the ball signal was up, and that indicated the track was clear. That's where high ball comes from. 1833 steam whistle invented. We talked about that previous slide. 1887 General Time Convention adopts a standard code. Uniform whistle, flag, and hand signal. That's the earliest standard codes of signals that the United States had adopted. 1834 Association of American Railroads carries a standard code forward. The standard code of operating rules was a standard system of operating rules, procedures, typically in the west of the Mississippi. That was adopted by the Association of American Railroads. Today, 1985, is basically everything was further consolidated. They jettisoned the standard code and they adopted what's called the General Code of Operating Rules, G-Corps. Okay, pretty much west of Mississippi. There's some railroads east of Mississippi. And NORAC, which is Northeast Operating Rules Advisory Committee. That's in the Northeast. And CSX has their own rules. Southern has their own rules. Long Island Railroad has their own rules. Metro North has their own rules. But even though they have their own rules, there are a lot of commonality between these various railroads. It'll be interesting to see how Norfolk Southern UP combine their rules when they if and merge. If and when? Okay. And 2005, that was when the Federal Railroad Administration federalized the sounding of the whistle, too long to short and long, at highway roadway crossings. And there's a lot of history behind that. There was, go back in the early 80s, Florida had a whistle ban, and when they had a whistle ban at the state level, there were a whole raft of grade crossing accidents that occurred, and the FRA stepped in and federalized the law. So today, it's a federal law that trains have to sound the horn approaching a grade crossing. Now, there are some exceptions, and that's called a quiet zone. Local towns can petition to the Federal Railroad Administration, have what they call a quiet zone, and they have to do additional supplemental appliances and procedures at that location to make sure it's not sounding the horn that mitigates any potential for accidents. Double gates, median barriers, so forth and so on. Okay, next. There it is. It's a short circle and a longer dash. And there's the two long, the short, and the long. That's the standard pretty much in North America. Two long, short, and long for approaching grade crossings. Very good. So what are some of the other signals that the locomotive will signal? Stop, apply brakes, two dashes. That's release brakes. Proceed. Now you notice I have that in red. That's because that goes back to the day when you had brake bin and flag bin, and a lot of brakes were applied by hand. Well, today that's all brakes are automatic, so that procedure went away because the engineer no longer has to communicate to the flag bin and the brake bin. And if he did, he'd be using the radio today. So those signals are pretty much gone away. The signal and the two shorts are no longer used today. Two shorts, acknowledgement, answer to any signal not otherwise provided. Typically, a lot of times you'll hear if a train is sitting, going to sit for a while and it's going to move, the engine will sound two toots. It's kind of like, okay, wake up everybody, I'm going to move. Three shorts is when standing back up, and it's also an acknowledgement of a hand signal from the conductor or brakeman to the engineer. It'll sound three toots. Okay? Call for signals, four shorts, and along as approaching the stations, junctions, and railroad crossings and grade. Okay? Next one. Can you proceed there? Next slide.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, got it. All right. Two longs, a short and a long. We talked about that before. A series, a succession of sounds. There's nothing more than a warning. There's cattle crossing the track. There's press breakers on the track. A series of short whistles. One long and three shorts. Flagmen go back to protect the rear of the train. That's cool. We're not protecting the rear of the train because we have radios and signals, wayside signals, providing for that safety between trains. 1, 2, 3, 5 long. Flagmen may return from the east or north. No, east or north. Anybody know what that is? That gets into a very deep subject, superiority trains. We won't get into that. But again, flagman doesn't go out and protect the train anymore. Except in an emergency, a dire emergency, that they will have to do flagging procedures, but not in the traditional sense, flagging for the movement of trains. And short and long, inspect the brake system for leaks. Okay. And we talked about that. There it is, the crossing signal, two longs, a short and a long. 15 to 20 seconds, quarter mile out, and 96 to 110 feet. Question in the back.
Yeah, I have a question about whistles and horns. What do they blow when there's people working on the tracks?
Usually just a series of succession of sounds. Nothing. Some railroads may have a specific sound, some of them just any series of succession of whistles. Yep. Good question. And it's 96 to 110 dB. That's pretty darn loud.
Yeah, decibels.
Fine zones earlier. Okay. I'll jump that a little bit there. There we go. Next one. Next one is the conductor's buzzer. This is the passenger cars, typically commuter cars, will have a buzzer on each car at the vestibule, so the conductor can signal the engineer, right? So two shorts is proceed. So if the conductor's on the ground getting passengers on and off the car, everybody's on, and he'll hit the buzzer twice, and it tells the engineer, okay to proceed. Question? Yeah?
Why don't they just use walkie-talkies?
Or they can use a walkie-talkie as well. That's fine as well. Radio is fine. What is not fine is electronic devices other than the railroad supplied radio. That's also federalized. An engineer cannot be on his iPad. It can't be in his iPhone running a train. That's a no-no. But they can use the official railroad radio because that's specific to that operation. But yes, they can use the radio as well.
The last thing you want is to get distracted.
Why? What's that?
Saying the last thing anyone wants is an engineer getting
You don't
distracted.
want the engineer distracted, yes.
I mean, that's what happened in Chatsworth in 2008.
You're ahead of the game. Chatsworth, that was a game changer, Chatsworth. And that ushered in the thing called positive train control. We're not going to get into that. But go ahead.
Yeah, SEPTA still uses the buzzers, don't they?
I would think so. Yeah. Yeah, you probably find the radio more like with Amtrak, with longer trains. The buzzers, more applicable to shorter commuter type operation. New Jersey train, I would assume, but you're right, SEPTA doesn't use the buzzer. All right, 3 is a backup, 4 is supply or release air brakes, reduce speed, and 5 is recall the flagman. It's hardly done anymore. There's no flagman per se because we're using radios and and CPC and so forth for the type of trends. There's the tower signal. Okay, we have one long, all movements within the interlocking must stop. Now I had a question earlier, how do I know that's the signal from a tower versus another? And again, this is going away. There are fewer and fewer towers out there these days. I don't know that any places that still have this in place anymore. You know, in recent years, this goes away with the elimination of the towers and radio communication. 3 is whistle or horn test. 4 is a signal maintainer. So they're looking for a signal maintainer. He hears that. He's got to get to the block phone before they have radios. 5 is electric traction employee. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 toots on the tower. There's a track guy on the ground. They want the track guy to call the dispatcher or call the tower operator. I mentioned the ball signal before. That's what we hear in the folklore, high ball. A lot of people use that. People don't even have any connection to railroads. They'll say, that's high ball, keep going. Where did that come from? Came from the railroad. Before we had electric block signals, so that the operator on the ground, what they call the block operator, would get out and he would actually pull up and pull down the ball to give the signal to the train to proceed. And how did he know it was okay? Any guesses? How did the block operator know to pull the signal? Talk to the dispatcher. In the old days, it was a telegraph. They had telegraph messages, and they had telephone block phones, and today, of course, there's telephones and radios. So this goes away. There's none in operation, and there's a set of them in New Hampshire. They're still there today. They're not used, but it's preserved as a historical artifact. Okay. So far, we've been talking about what kind of signals? Audible, right? You can hear. How about lantern signals and hand signals? Okay. So can anybody show me what a stop signal would look like using your hand? There you go. There you go. There's an old on the back there. Back and forth. All right? Back and forth. All right. How about proceed?
Raise and lower vertically.
Up and down. Proceed. It's like you're waving. Hi. Go ahead. Up and down. Proceed. All right? These are still used today. You have particularly in switching operations, you have a guy on the ground with the engineer, and they're passing signals back and forth. They can use hand signals. Reduce speed. Just hold it out like that. That's reduce. How about backup? Anybody show me backup? There you go. One to back up. There you go. Back up. All right, that's backup. All right, how about apply air brakes? Let's go back and forth like this overhead. That's apply air brakes. All right. Release air brakes. There you go. Hold it up like that. That's release air brakes.
Who's giving the signal and who's receiving the
Typically, it is the guy on the ground giving the signal to the engineer. Typically. Could be a trainman, a flagman, a brakeman, switchman. Very commonly in switching operations, the guy on the ground communicating back and forth with the engineer. They also make up their own kind of little things. They go like this, or they'll go like this when they're getting close to coupling. They're not sanctioned signals when a lot of times they'll come up with their own, little moniker to convey information back and forth. Okay? Drop pantograph. What's up before we get to that? What is it? You got it. What's a pantograph?
Yeah, the electric pickup on top of the train.
There you go.
You pick up power from the overhead wires.
There you go. Pantograph. Like a box, right? That's what they call a box pantograph,
Yeah.
or what they call a Faisley pantograph. That collects the power. Typically 12 kV.
They're called
600 volts in transit. Some transit railroad properties, 1,500 volts in the Chicago area.
And don't forget the
question on
trolley
that.
pole type pantographs.
Sorry.
I was saying there's also the trolley pole.
The trolley pole is another method. trolley pole. Question
What
about
would be the advantage of using hand signals as compared with electronic signals?
quick and easy. There's foolproof. If I'm an engineer, I can see the conductor
That would
down
work
there.
during the day. How about during the night?
You have a lane in your hand.
The lantern is more effective than an electronic signal?
If you're doing switching operations, instead of fumbling with the radio, putting it down, you're holding the light, it's very handy, quick.
Okay, just
The
saying.
further away you get, then yes, with radio is better. If you have a long train, I'm coupling, I'm out of sight of the engineer, then you're gonna revert to the radio. When
Thank
you're
you.
close by, it's just nice, quick, easy.
You have problems with your phone?
Yep. Good
Thanks a
question.
lot.
Yeah, good question. All right. Now, there's some hand signals that are gone because of radio communications and brake sticking. It used to go like this, and there's somebody in the ground, and the train's going by, and it doesn't have to be a crew member. If I'm a track guy, and I saw a train go by, I see smoke coming out of the wheels, and I would go like this. And then he's sticking brakes, right? Like this. That's a sticking
Yep.
brake. They don't use that anymore mainly because of the radio communication. Brake sticking at night, holding the lantern up just like this. They don't use it anymore. Journal by day. What's a journal? Anybody
Yeah.
tell me?
The axle bearings on a freight car truck.
Okay. How about a passenger? No journals in a passenger?
Yeah, passengers have journals as well.
There you go. Okay. Particularly in the old days, what they call
Yeah,
friction
even-
bearings.
Yeah,
instead of
even
roller
locomotives
bearings.
have journals as well.
Okay, and locomotives have that. So they get hot. That's what they call a hot box or a hot journal.
Yeah.
Right? So they used to go like this. I don't think anybody does that anymore. They
Yeah,
used
since
to
the
get
advantage of the roller bearings.
roller bearing, yeah, they get a hot roller bearing as well, but more common with the friction bearing.
Yeah, and if the friction bearings aren't tended to, there could be grave consequences, like what happened in 1943 at Frankfurt Junction.
This guy's in the law here, I'll tell you. Think about what takes me a second, so. This is rough. And hot journal by day, it will hold the lantern, that's by night. Oh yeah, by night, you hold the lantern up against your chest, that's the same as that. Okay. What do the colors mean?
Yeah, red means stop.
Right, red means stop. How about yellow?
Proceed with caution.
Very good. In the back.
I was going to ask, because I'm noting that, red, yellow, and green are very similar to the signals we use for car traffic. Were they the ancestor to those signals being used in a traffic light?
Railroad flags were long before there were automatic highways set up. The highway people stole it from the railroad.
Okay, thank you, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Back in time, I'm a little bit fuzzy in this, but early on, the red and green were different. They were swapped.
Oh,
Very early on, they were swapped with it, but that was long before the highways came in. Yeah. So the yellow means a little bit different in railroad language than it does the highway. And then what it means is that expect something coming up, whereas in the highway, yellow means something's happening right here, you have to be careful of. Green. Go, proceed.
Yeah, proceed.
Okay. Blue, any guess what a blue means?
Workers on the rails.
Okay. What kind of workers?
The workers on, under, or between equipment. The equipment must not be moved.
Yeah, that's reserved for what they call maintenance of the equipment employees,
Oh, yeah.
MOV.
Oh yeah, maintenance workers.
Maintenance of the equipment, specifically for employees working, mechanical employees working on the train cars.
Yep.
Okay? Anybody follow the big boy? Anybody follow the big boy?
Yeah, I've seen it in Nesquehoning and Scranton.
Yeah.
It was pure chaos.
They have,
with
they have-
people
in the
wanting to
internet, they
see
have a
this
series
for
of
lifetime
medallions.
opportunity.
Okay, and the medallions for each
Yeah,
employee.
I saw it in Steamtown as well.
That's part of the blue signal protection. So that engine wouldn't move until they had all the medallions of every employee involved in that operation. That's part of the blue signal protection. Wait,
Yeah, it means that the train is an extra, not shown in the timetable.
you're good. That's correct. So what does a green mean when it comes to not a regular green as far as a signal, but a green?
As in the class light green, like
A That's a class lights, yeah. Green,
Another section of the same scheduled train is following.
They used to run what they call train. They had classification to trains.
Yes.
Superior trains over extra trains, and an extra train would be the white.
Yep.
So when the train was not on the timetable, it would bear a white flag. We don't have that anymore. Railroads don't have classification of trains. So if you see these flags, they're for historical use only. They really don't carry any meaning today.
Mm-hmm.
The green means that that train has a second section. So sometimes they would run two trains as one. They would be following one another, and they would be running on the same timetable schedule. So if you saw green, it tells you it would have a second section to that train. No more today. You don't see that anymore. You still will see a red on the rear of the train. Okay, that is required. And red, it tells you that's the rear of the train. Why is that so important? It's the rear of the train. You're going to be backing, you're going to be crashing in the rear of the train. It also tells you the train is complete.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm doing switching, cars around, I may have my part of my train to be left back here, so that tells me that if I see a train that there's no flag or red, that tells me it could be switching, and the rest of this train is elsewhere, so they go a couple back up to it. All right, any questions?
No.
Flags planted in the ground. In addition to flags on the train, flagmen carrying flags, we also have flags or signs planted in the ground, and they mean various things. Of course, yellow is a caution, and green is proceed, and it has different meanings with different railroads specific to speed restrictions and workers on the track. The main groups of rules that are out there is Norfolk Southern, CSX, NORC, and NUCOR. The NORC is the most complicated in that it's the most precise. They have, in addition to the color, they have a number typically right on the sign. For example, if it's a 30, that's a temporary speed restriction of 30 miles an hour. The S is the beginning, so they'll have 30 out the braking distance, and the S is the speed itself at the point of the restriction. For working limits, we're going to have workers on the railroad. NORC has a yellow A, that means approach workers. There'll be a red sign at the workers, and the train has to stop at that red sign, and the train can only proceed after the worker on the ground says it's okay to proceed past my stop sign. And then at the end of my area of work, I'll have an R for a resume. Right? Likewise, on CSX, it's a yellow with a diagonal. That tells the engineers to work crew ahead. But they can't rely on the signs alone. What happens if the sign falls? The engineer has instructions where the sign should be located.
Yes.
And if they're not there, he still has to obey as if the sign was there.
Correct.
Very good. Thank you. I'll have to put some mistakes in there, see if you pick them up. Okay. Switch targets and lamps. All right, what's a switch?
Yeah.
Somebody know what a switch is?
It changes the track from one place to another.
There you go. It's a device where the train can switch from one track to the other or transfer from one track to the other. A lot of them have targets, but they all do not have targets. It is not a requirement. Targets on a switch is not a federal requirement. It's just whatever the railroads decide. Typically, they will be used on yard tracks for a quick, ready reference for the engineer and the conductor on the ground when they're doing switching operations. Of course, typically red means not necessarily stop, but in this case, the red means that the switch is lined over for the what they call the reverse position.
Correct.
Line it over for the straight. That would be typically green. Some railroads do different colors, but the most common color is red and green. Red meaning the switch is reversed. Okay? Now you may or may not have to stop. If you're doing what's called a trailing movement and it's red, you can't go through unless it's a semi-automatic switch. Probably getting too deep here. If you're doing a facing movement, the red tells you you're going to go what's called the reverse position or the turnout position. Okay? But not all cases the straight is the normal position. That's called a non-conforming normal position. Lance, before we had target, we were called targets, these flags are called targets typically. Today, they're just a reflectorized banner. They used to have kerosene lamps on the switch. And they would keep them lit, and they'd have a glass lens on it. And that would, when the switch rotated, it would go from red to green with the rotation of the switch. And they went to electric, and then typically today it's just a reflectorized banner. Okay. This gets a little bit deep here. This gets into rights, class, and direction. We touched on it earlier. Trains in the, what they call the timetable train order days. Trains ran on timetable and class. Class meaning trains had rights. Certain trains had rights over other trains. The first class train had a right of way, so therefore the second class trains had to get into the side and let the first class train go by. Okay, the timetable for the class. Every regular freight train first class for passenger trains, and second class for time freights, and third, fourth class for level drags. In practice, class belonged to the passenger trains. As scheduled freights faded in the timetable, most freight trains ran as an extra. Today, freight trains don't run on a quote-unquote timetable schedule. They try to. It's another thing called precision railroading. We won't go down that rabbit hole. And superiority decided who took the siding. A train was superior by right, class, or direction. Okay. Right by train order, class, and direction by timetable, with a right superior to both. Inferior trains cleared the times of the superior train. If they didn't, what did they do? They had the flag. It's called rule on the line. They're not going to have a flag and protect this train. They didn't get out of the way. All right. Markers. We touched this before. White is what? What kind of train is it? Is it a regular or is it extra? White. Extra. Very good. You paid attention. I'm impressed. Green flags. This train had a second section. So if you see a locomotive with a green, in the old days they tell me that train's running in sections. There's another train right behind it without a flag. So it's actually running as one train, but they follow that intersection. There's all visual signals for the wayside workers, the other trains, tower operators. Tower operators saw a train coming with a green flag, he knows, okay, there's going to be a second section. Go ahead.
If there were 3 trains in a row, would the first 2 have green flags, or would just...
They only ran, that's a good question. Typically they ran in pairs, first, second. I believe they also had the third section.
I see.
Sometimes they'll have 3 trains running in a row on the same timetable schedule, but typically 2. That's a good question.
The Nellie Bly was a 3-train.
What?
The Nellie Bly was a 3-train accident.
Which one? I'm sorry.
When the Nellie Bly
Okay.
had that accident, it was a 3rd train.
There was a third section? Or?
Yes.
Okay, very good. That answers the question. Very good. Thank you. That's a good one. That's a very famous case. Yeah. But typically there were 2. But thank you for confirming for me. Yeah, very good. Markers. Okay, what's a marker?
Yeah, it's a light that marks the end of the train.
It's a marker that marks the end of the train. And in the old days of cabooses, the caboose would have flags or kerosene lamps marking the rear of the train.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
red meaning it's the rear of the train.
Yep.
And marks it for the next train following to stop. When they would get this right, when they get into the siding and pick up, they would turn the marker. So the green would display, so the green indicated, oh, I'm in the clear on the siding. So another use for the green, other than just proceed, I'm in the clear in the siding. Okay, good stuff.
Yeah, markers are still used to stay on passenger trains.
There are both freight and passenger.
Yeah.
The freight train is typically what's called the FRED, freight rear end device.
Yep.
It's an electric device that the air brake powers a generator, and that creates electricity for the light. It also is typically a 2-way communication device. If the engineer puts the brakes on in the locomotive, it sends a signal back, radio signal to the FRED, and the FRED will also set the brakes up to the rear of the train. Whereas on passenger trains, they typically will not have a FRED on it. The passenger trains still today have a red marker built in the back of the car,
Yep.
designated that. So depending, I mean, most of the cars have a marker on it. So the first training is not an issue. The last car will display the marker. Okay. And there's what I was just talking about right there. There's a conductor on the caboose. He's checking out his rear marker, his lantern. If he's getting in the side, he's turning it, right, to display it right on the exterior. And the red, of course, means rear of the train stop. There's the passenger train with the marker lights. There's an anti car with the two red lights built into the back of the car. That's the marker. That's simply the rear of the train. Okay, keep on going. The rise and fall of class signals. Orders join the timetable. Charles Minot's first train order on the Erie Railroad. That's the dispatcher and then the timetable. So originally it only ran on timetables. That's the only thing they ran on. It comes along the train order. The train order came along with the telegraph. The block operator communicating back and forth with the train dispatcher and coordinating movements. And sections, the 1890s and 1940s, there were, as we talked about, sections of trains. The green flag that had sections, typically 2 sections of a train. And then in the 1930s to the 60s, CTC is centralized traffic control. That means the dispatcher, instead of having a tower operator every so many miles, the dispatcher in one location can control the signals and switches for many, many miles around. That's centralized traffic control. And that started the doom of the class. You didn't need so many scripted ways of moving trains with lights and superiority. They let the signal do the work for them. Okay, the automatic clock signals. All right, and 1960s and 1980s, the lamps go dark. That's the end. That starts the downfall of the caboose. The caboose starts to go away. No more class, no more flagging the rear of the train. Instead of having a 5-man crew, now we're down in some cases just two in the train. An engineer and a conductor and a locomotive.
Yep.
You still might have 3 or so in a yard operation, a switching operation where you need the people on the ground on a couple of cars, but typically 2-man crew. That's another.
Yeah, and the cabooses that are still around today are just shove platforms where a person rides on the back on that car.
That would be a conductor or brakeman riding in the rear of the car.
Yep.
Typically a switching operation or a backup operation.
Yep.
Okay. Rule 99, the flagging goes back. That goes back to the old days. Red flag by day, red light by night, and red and white light by night. Torpedoes. What's a torpedo? We'll get to that in the next slide.
It's strapped to the railhead, exploded by the wheels of a following train.
Yeah, what's shown here is a fusee. They're still around. Fusees are found on trains. They're commonly used at a highway rail grade crossing.
Yeah, unprotected crossings to be precise.
This guy's good. He's ahead of me. Coming up to a crossing, the gates are not working, or it's an exempt crossing. Remember I talked about an exempt? Where the highway has it right away, where the crew has to put a fusee out to stop the traffic. But the fusee's not used like it used to be years ago with flagging the train itself, Rule 99. And the next slide, I believe, is the torpedo. There it is. The torpedo was the flagging spool. Okay, if I'm a train running a timetable, schedule, and I break down, flagging will go back. In double track territory, the train would be running on specific directions of track. So he would go back and flag. He would just walk back, and then he would put torpedoes on the rail. Okay, that's an extra loud noise that the engineer would hear as a wake-up call as a train ahead. And of course, the fusee, we would use the fusee to do this flagging operation. Very common today for train movement, typically highway road very crossing use. Okay, next up. The blue flag. The blue flag, I mentioned this earlier. Blue is for the mechanical department employees working on or about the equipment. And that means if the train comes up and typically you are in a passenger terminal area, if they see a blue flag, that means beyond that blue flag, there's equipment. I cannot move into that track. I cannot couple to that track. until I talk to the employee in charge of that area, get the employees clear, that they can release a blue flag and let the train move in there. A very, very strict rule applies to maintenance of equipment employees, so they are not injured, so the train does not move while they're on or about the equipment, doing work on the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next. What was retired? What survived? Retired was train order and classification. Even today, the train order is gone. The train order was a piece of paper. They had what they call the Form 19 and the Form 31. And they were written by typically the block operator or train dispatcher, handed to the train crew with specific instructions. There was an extra train that would give them authority to move. Right? Today, the train order is really gone altogether. Now they have a thing, more effective, what they call a D form. It's a simplified form, and when they call on the radio, the engineer conductor write down the information on that form, which is a lot different than the old days where the dispatcher and the operator would write it and hand it to them. Now they get that information by radio and write it down. So the train order is gone, now replaced by NORAC. It's a D form, G-Core is track warrant, and different just forms, so just a prescribed form that the engineer carries. And there now a lot of times that information is given to them electronically on a computer screen on the locomotive. So technology, the railroad is going with technology. Question. Talking about technology, the railroads really were ahead of their game on a lot of this stuff. So what was the first industry to have the fax machine? Railroads. The railroads invented the fax. The fax was used by railroads to communicate information back and forth on paper. So the railroads were ahead of the time there. What else is going on? 99 flag protection, right? The engineer stops the train, the engineer says the flag can go back and protect.
Just to jump on your last point,
Yes.
was the railroad industry the first to use the telegraph?
It was right about the same time. Morris did the telegraph, and then the railroads adopted it right away. And the very, very first use was an experiment by Morris, so the railroads adopted it like immediately.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of a nuance there, so but it was the first industry.
First industry, that's what I said.
Telegraph. It was allowed to be a little bit before, but it was the first industry to adopt it.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question. Yeah. Torpedoes are gone, markers are gone, replaced by, and then what? There's somebody with the whistle on their phone. Markers. I like that. Markers replaced by EOT devices, and a little bit of nuance there. I mentioned that, of course, there's still markers on passenger trains. So on freight trains, the markers gone now in the EOT devices. Yeah.
I was going to ask, when did torpedoes fall out of use?
Go back a slide or two. It's on the slide. Probably in the
Terribly.
1980s, I'm going to say. Torpedoes, go back another one there. Go back another one. Probably in the 1980s. In the 1980s, it went away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first started, I could still find them around. That was in the early 70s. Like they were still around by the 80s, they were gone. Yeah. Was retired. Okay, still in service. The beloved Too Long is a Short and Long. Okay, that's for great crossings. Right? And backing, acknowledging, alarm whistle signals, blue signal protection, hand signals and switching, fusees for grade crossings typically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And any object. So if you're along the railroad and there's, I don't do this unless you have to, there's something radically wrong, and you start doing this, and if you think you're doing a focused service, hi, the engineer could mistake that as it's an emergency signal. So moderator, hello, don't do this. Do this that way. Oh no, everything is okay. Don't start doing all this kind of stuff because at a distance, he might take it as a railroad employee saying there's something wrong. Okay? That's a nice little advice in there for you. What else is that? Backing, we got that, hand signals. Yeah, we're good. And of course, blue signal is still here and will always be here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that is the presentation. transportation, I could talk hours and hours on stuff. You know, people will ask me, well, what do the lights mean on the signals? You know, what does all that mean? Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question. Down in Morrisville, I know they have an unprotected grade crossing, and they move freight through there.
Yep.
And when they come up to it, the brakeman starts throwing out flares. Okay, I guess
Yep.
Uzis. What's the requirement for them when they approach an unprotected crossing? Do they have to stop at the whistle?
Unprotected, I don't want to call it unprotected, I prefer it, what's called a passive. There's two types of passive and active. Active meaning that flashers and gates are just flashers. Passive grade crossings, of course, unless it's an exempt, the railroad has a right of way. So the people, in effect, when you're driving to a passive, called unprotected, it's universally, most people don't understand this, and they should. When you come to a passive grade crossing with a crosswalk, that is the equivalent to a yield sign. That is exactly the equivalent to yield. You have to yield to the train. So the best thing to do is, open your window and listen and slow down. Do some crossings, if perhaps if the train is switching an industrial area and a lot of back and forth at the crossing, he may use flat fusees, but that's depending on what he's doing. There's no universal requirement for fusees at crossing, other than if the train is going through a crossing in which there is active warning devices and he's got notification from the dispatcher, then he's going to put fusees out at night and flag it during the daylight. For a passive crossing, again, I can only think of if there's some switching going on, something a little bit complicated that the motorists may be confused and they might use some fusees or flags in that case. But there's no universal requirement for a passive crossing. Okay, good question. Any other questions? Go ahead.
When a train is backing up,
Yep.
how does the operator of the train know that everything is safe at the back end of it?
Good question. You've hit on the third rail, and the third rail is this. In the industry, what we call a blind shove. If a locomotive engineer is making a blind shove, and he doesn't know what's going on back there, all right, that's very dangerous. So if a shoving movement has to be made, it's got to be protected. Meaning, the engineer has to have a clear view to where he's shoving to. So if you only have a couple of cars, no problem. But for a longer cutter car the owner can see, he better have a brakeman or his conductor riding in the rear of the train and be in hand contact, radio contact. So yes, that's the third rail, blind shoves. Yep. And some yards will have, a hump yard, the train isn't going to roll free. There's nothing stopping it, so that's a special division. It's a good question with regard to what's called remote control locomotive zones. And the railroads are very particular about that. If they're running RCO, remote control operation, which means there's only typically one guy on the ground, he has the remote control, and he's running that engine back and forth and coupling cars. That is a very designated. You don't go into there just for that same reason. You do not go into the remote control zone unless you let them know, so they know you're there. So that falls into that as well. Good question.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
I just learned the word telltale. And so you've been talking about visual notifications
That's a good one.
and audio notifications. This is really a tactile notification.
Very good.
So are there other tactile notifications?
That's a good question. So what he's talking about is in the old days, before they had automatic air brakes, the conductor would ride, and the brakeman would ride actually on top of the freight cars, and they would actually apply the hand brakes.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah,
the train
pretty
was
risky.
on, there's an overhead bridge. They have these ropes hanging down, so the conductor would hit him in the head with the ropes.
Oops.
I have to duck because there's a bridge going by. That's a telltale. So the question is there any other tactile? The only one I can think of, this is going down a little bit of a rabbit hole. There's they're out there. There are devices. I don't want to call them the dog shock collar, but another tactile,
Mhm.
form of, mooring.
What do they call that? So you give us just.
A train approach warning system, an automatic train approach warning system. Automatic train approach warning system. That's not in the presentation, but anyhow, that's another tactile. That's sort of an emerging technology. Let's worry of that because of, if things go wrong, what happens, so I have to be very careful how you implement that. That's a good question. The only other tactile I can think of is, not for the train crews, but the edge of station platforms. They have what they call the tactile strip on the station platform. This is about an 8 wide.
Those little buckles.
And that's along the edge of the platform. That's for blind people when they, with their stick, they'll feel the tactile. That's not for the train crew, that's for the passengers.
Yeah.
You know the tactile.
This indicates that that they're about to hit the edge of the platform.
Yeah, that's the end of the platform.
I think this is also used on some sidewalks to this day.
Yeah, sidewalks, yeah, unless the person that are coming up to the intersection is tactile.
Yeah.
Strip, yeah.
Thank you.
Other warning device, you're asking about it, the locomotive engineer, when he's operating his train, they used to have a thing called a dead man. The locomotive engineer
Dead man switch.
used to have his foot on the pedal, and if he fell asleep, he would get off the pedal, overload, and that would put the train brakes in the emergency.
Yeah. Although some people found ways to bypass it, like putting heavy objects to weigh it down.
So the next step is, what they have today is an alerter, where the alerter goes off every so many minutes and the engineer has to tap the button. Okay, that was the next step from the dead man. Today it's an active warning system. The engineer doesn't have to touch a button. If he's moving along a certain distance, if he doesn't move his hand, pull away his hand and put his hand back on the control stand, that'll set an alert to wake him up, and if the train, if he doesn't respond, that'll slow the train down. So the engineer, sometimes you'll hear it, you watch videos, there's like a tweaking noise, and the engineer hears this noise. It's like, what a noise, that's the locomotive engineer alert. That keeps him awake. That's more audible in that case.
Mm-hmm.
What else is out there? Oh, I can think of it. Any other questions? Or good questions? A question in the back.
I have two as well.
Okay.
So, you made mention of a FRED a few times.
Yes.
And it's capitalized as if it's an acronym, but there's no mention of what FRED stands for. So,
Freight rear end device. Freight
you might
rear
have said
end
that, but
device.
apologies.
Not very nice. Freight rear end device. That's already good. Freight, freight train, freight rear end device.
Thank you.
Today they call it telemetric device, Fred, rear end device, but Fred is more of a, they didn't like it. Okay. Yeah, the conductors didn't like the fact that the Fred is taking his job from them. How's that? All right, good question. Freight rear end device.
And then my other question was.
Yes, another question. Go ahead.
Sorry, my other question was, when you mentioned that there are typically 5 workers on a historic train, our enthusiasts in the crowd mentioned 4 of them. It was the conductor, engineer, flagman, and I believe fireman. Who is the 5th? And if I mistook that 4th one, I'm not as confident on that one.
All right, that's good. I have put my thinking cap on. Of course, you had an engineer, and then you had a fireman. He was stoking the boiler, right? You had a conductor. He's in charge of the train. And you'd have a brakeman, and then a flagman. There's your 5.
Thank you.
There's your 5. Okay, sometimes they'll have a front brakeman and a back brakeman. That goes back to the old days before they had automatic air brakes. They might have 6, 7 train crew members applying the brakes. But in modern times, it was 5. Good question. Okay, any others? All right.
And that concludes our presentation.
go from 3